Hello there, welcome back to another series of shows. This is a kind of a one-off to start. I'm trying something new with a green screen using a webcam and in the background. It's still in development. You probably see me a bit pale and maybe not the best lit thing yet, but I'll work it out as I go. I'm just trying to start it off and see what I can do with it. So it's just not a set of books behind the main thing. So it's in development. I'm not going through into my old schedule quite yet. I'm not sure if I'm even going to do that this year. I may actually just do a bit more randomly this year. I don't know. I'm still working it out. But this is kind of a setup I'm trying. So I'm going to start off by talking about Apocalypse Now, the final cut. Now, this has been released last year by Francis Coppola. As with many films, there's plenty of cuts of this one. This is one of those films with lots of cuts. Kind of like Blade Runner, where there's tons of cuts. It's almost like the director can't make up his mind what the final cut of his film actually is. It just feels like he's just going slightly insane, trying to work out what's the final version of this film that I also have never quite finished. I mean, George Lucas is the same with the Star Wars thing as well. They can't stop fidgeting. And I've got three different versions of this film now. There's the original theatrical cut, where they also had two endings to that one. They had one ending where the compound got blown up, and one ending didn't. So you had two different cuts. Even then, you could see, I remember on DVDs, you could actually have like the theatrical cut, but you could choose between, you could watch the theatrical version, then you'd see the alternative outtakes of the finale of the explosions done over the credits. Then Coppola came back in 2001 with Apocalypse Now Redux, where him and Walter Murch went into footage, found out scenes that was cut out that they really liked, but they felt they had to cut them out during making the film, so the film would have a momentum, sort of a commercial film. But these were scenes that weren't needed, but they thought added something to the overall atmosphere of the film and the sort of moral weight of the film, and created a new cut. And sometimes would add alternative versions of scenes that weren't theatrical cut. So there would be variations. So it would be two different cuts you would have, and you could choose between them. And to be honest, I didn't really have a favourite. I could watch one and watch the other, whatever it was in, really. Just depending on what I felt like. I felt like a longer version, I watched the long cut. I felt like a shorter version, I watched the short cut. There was a good advantages and disadvantages of both, but there was always a cut you could watch. So there was two cuts. You had a choice. I was fine with that. I have a Blu-ray where you both cuts. You get Heart of Darkness, which was a documentary making the film. You had a lot of extras about like Coppola talking to Martin Sheen, to John Milius who wrote it. You know, all that stuff. And Coppola, he seemed happy enough. He'd got his second cut out there. It felt, I think it probably felt pretty good to actually have an alternative version. Something close to what he originally had in mind. So the film went on, was still viewed as a masterpiece by most people. There's a few outliers who didn't view that, but generally a lot of people just generally viewed it as a great film. And Coppola went on to do absolutely nothing for the next 20 years. And then suddenly, he comes out with this third cut, the final cut. Just like Blade Runner had a final cut with Ridley Scott, here we have a final cut, the version of the film that was and this is in between, around the time in between the theatrical, which was 12:20, and the Redux, which was about an hour and a bit longer. And this was almost 3 hours, this one, the final cut. And it kept in some of the Redux stuff, but took out some other stuff, and created what Coppola felt was the final version of the film. If you bought the 4K in America, you could get all the versions of it, but only the final cut came in 4K, I think. I've got my old version of the cut where you got the different cuts I just described. But these were a new remastering of all the different versions, so that it'd been remastered in 4K just to make it look better. And this was just shown by Coppola as, this is my final version of the film. This is the definite version of this film. This is the one you should go to. Ugh. It's kind of like, I'm not sure Who's Seen Pat Garrett Billy the Kid? Now, there was a couple of versions of that film made. That's another one where there's tons of versions. There was the theatrical cut that was a bit butchered by the studio. There was the cut that Turner Classics released, which was the first cut of the film before Peckinpah was fired. And then years later, some Peckinpah experts tried to go back and put some stuff in to the theatrical cut and try and do a melding of it. And what they did was create this thing where it was the worst of both worlds, because they tried to present that this is what Peckinpah would have wanted from this film if he had time to make the film, if he'd been left alone. And it just felt like a hodgepodge of stuff that had no sense of direction, no sense of impetus. Like the rough cut that was released with the Turner Classic cut, which had a lot of roughness to it, actually felt more like a film than this supposedly remastered version. And the same things happened here with Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now just feels, the final cut feels like the least final cut you'd ever do. Like, I would much rather watch the two other cuts because they feel definite in what they are. This one just feels like it's a hodgepodge of the two cuts, and it isn't the strength of either. Because the strength of the original cut is it's like a nightmare, psychedelic nightmare, and you're going through hell, and it's a weird, weird film. That's the attraction of that version of the film. The longer Redux cut feels like a much slower film. You're floating through hell, and you've seen all these weird side events now, like the French plantation. You see them run into the bunny rabbits after the big sequence where the bunny rabbits are almost attacked, or where all those soldiers try and get onto the stage when they're doing their show, and you get a scene with them meeting up with the crew of the boat later on. You know, all these other stuff that you didn't need it for the film, but it added a lot to the characters and added a sense of atmosphere, and it actually felt like a new, unique, different version of the film. And you had more Brando, you had more atmosphere, and you felt like you were getting something unique. But the Redux cut, you felt you were still getting the film, but you could always go back to see the other version of the film, and it was fine. Like, the faster version of the film was there, the slower version of the film was there, and as I said earlier, you could go to whatever one you wanted. Here it feels much more like there's a version of the film that's been made and it's been compressed, and the strength of either is not there. Like, there's because I've paced up a bit and taken stuff out, when you get to the French plantation sequence, it feels off. It feels wrong. It should not be there if you're going a fast-paced film. It only worked if you did the slower-paced film, and then it seemed to settle into the flow of the story. As soon as you pace it up a bit, that sequence feels like it's going on forever, and you're just like, just get out of here, please get out of here. And you can't really see why it was cut out in a faster-paced film, because it just slows it down. But if you're in a slower-paced film like the Redux, when you get to it, there are problems with it, but it's really interesting to see the French version of Vietnam and what they saw as Vietnam and these people who had no real home. And it was wonderful in the Redux version because it was a version that taken its time. And it's like, now in this final cut, it feels off. And everything feels off. Anything from the Redux, suddenly, because you've cut other bits down, anything that's put back into the Redux just feels off. It just feels like, no, it doesn't fit. It just feels like I'm watching something that shouldn't be there. So, before going to talk about the Apocalypse Now generally, I should say, avoid this cut. The final cut, maybe see it once just for curiosity, but it's the least of the three cuts of the film that we know of. It's the least of them. It is the weakest. It's just not there. It just doesn't really go into the material the way the material demands. It just seems to be like the director wants it's in a certain way, and that's it. And he hasn't watched the film as what the film is telling him. It just feels like you've got scenes that are really haphazard, compressed together, and it's just unsatisfying. And the only reason it works to a degree is because Apocalypse Now is such a good film. To the film now, because I haven't actually talked about Apocalypse Now. It's one of those films that I felt I'd talked about, but I really hadn't. Because everyone's seen the film. Everyone, anyone who's a cineast who hasn't seen the film, it's a bit weird. It's like, well, why haven't you seen Apocalypse Now? It just seems like it's the obvious film to have seen. And it is wonderful. It's a wonderful film. Just not film cut. So, it takes place. I mean, obviously, the story, it's a riff on Hard Darkness. But it's a riff. It's not an actual adaptation of Hard Darkness. It's set in Vietnam. It takes certain context of Hard Darkness. So, like, there's a guy called Kurtz who's been down the river, who may have gone mad, who's viewed as a god by other people, and you're watching a narrator go down the river to try and confront Kurtz. And it's the idea of a man going slowly into the more primitive elements of humanity, going from civilization to the primitive elements, and, you know, finding what's in humanity that's darkness and there's a horror, and all that stuff. Apocalypse Now takes all that stuff, but it also takes stuff from the Odyssey. Like, John Milius was pretty much much like he was one of the writers of the film. He originated it, and it was like, some of it was Hard Darkness. Some of it was the Odyssey, the idea of Kilgore, who was a part of Robert Duvall, played this army commander in front of helicopters. He was like almost like the Cyclops that had to try and trick to get through his area. There was the Sirens, which was the Playboy Bunnies. There was the Odyssey was kind of something they were going through as they tried to go through the land and figure out how to get to Kurtz. So there was an Odyssey version too. So instead of going home, they're going down the river to hell, basically. So that's a different variation. So you've got those to combine. Plus you've got all these Vietnam stories that Milius's friends told him, because Milius was going to go to Vietnam, but because he had asthma, he wasn't allowed to go, which is a shame for him. But he got all his friends to tell him all these stories, and he wrote Apocalypse Now, which was one of those scripts that went round everybody said, "Oh, this is amazing! You got to meet this film." It was dark. It was over the top. It was a real gung ho attitude to the horrors of war. So it was and it was meant to be a George Lucas project. It was originally going to be that. Lucas was going to do it after THX, really. THX was his first film. He was going to do this after. THX was a bomb, so Lucas had to go and do American Graffiti. Then he got interested in Star Wars and moved on in that direction. So there's this film that Lucas was going to do a low budget. He was going to do it like found footage, like really do it like the Battle of Algiers, like really do this kind of over the top crazy film, but handhold it and all that. So it would have been a really interesting version, like a low budget version of this story. That didn't happen, and Coppola took it over after The Godfather 2, because he was high as he could be at that point. He'd done The Godfather 1 and 2, done The Conversation. He was the biggest director around, along with Friedkin and Bogdanovich, and they were about to be overtaken by Lucas and Spielberg, but they didn't know that then. They just thought mid-70s they were as high as he'd be. And they were all going to bomb horribly pretty soon. Because 70s directors understood hubris pretty well. So Coppola said, "Okay, I'll go make this film." And because he wanted to start his company Zoetrope, he owned the property, so he took it on, even though Lucas was kind of still thinking of doing it after Star Wars. He was still kind of... to him it was one of his projects that he would come back to, and he'd work out something out and he'd do it. Once he'd done the Star Wars thing, he still wanted to do it. But Coppola took over, so it became a Coppola film, and it became a much bigger film, and Coppola started to rewrite it to suit his needs, to be more artistic. And as Millie said, we become much more liberal and soft and all the rest of it. So there was some tension between everybody at this point, because Coppola took it over and was making his version of it. And Coppola was uncomfortable with certain things, like there was like the end pretty much was a fight between Kurtz and Willard against the American army, and there was just the madness of war. Like, I think the craziness the first half of the film went all the way through it, and none of the kind of meditative stuff at the end was there. So Coppola changed it. Coppola hired Brando. Coppola hired Harvey Keitel for his Willard. Then fired him pretty soon and brought in Martin Sheen, who's the best thing in the film. I mean, you've got the big stars like Robert Duvall, who's doing a great part. But that part can only last for like 20 minutes screen time tops, because it's so over the top, you can't really sustain that. I mean, Brando as well, if we had him for too long in the film, the way he was reading his lines, it would be boring as hell too. So, I mean, it's almost like the film is episodic and has its own little guest stars as you go through it. Like, Willard stops and talks to this person, and Willard stops and talks to that person. He is the central figure that's going through the film. He's the guy who you see the film through. And Sheen's so good at it, because he looks so haunted. And there's some great voiceovers that I did later, because they realised that there wasn't enough introspection. And like Milius and Coppola delivered all these scenes, they delivered all this atmosphere. They'd got great cinematographers, production designers. Everything looked gorgeous. And there was a story, and there was all these incidents, but there wasn't a central thing. All there was Martin Sheen studying things. There was no voiceover. They brought in Michael Hare, who had written Dispatches, which is an amazing book. You've got to read it. It's stunning. It's all about Vietnam. And he would also go on and to write Full Metal Jacket for Kubrick. So he wrote the voiceover, and he added that sense of tiredness and the explanation of who Kurtz was, which was the thing that brought it all together. So all the excesses of everyone else was brought together by this very understated performance by Sheen. And it just works like gangbusters, because you've got the exterior madness and then interior madness. And interior madness is a Willard, a man who is slowly going mad, but he's a professional and won't admit it. It's like the darkest possible version of a Howard Hawks movie, where Howard Hawks does not have friends, his character does not have, he has friends who keep them from going crazy and going isolated, and have romances. In this one, Martin Sheen's like lost his wife to divorce. He's almost catatonic. He never forms close bond with anybody. It's almost like this kind of professional character if he'd gone mad and was slowly going into Vietnam and going crazy and becoming an assassin. And it's wonderful. It's just such a good performance. And it really makes the film, and makes it really, really impactful. But you also have the set pieces. The set pieces are stunning. I mean, you've got the funny thing is, because Coppola directed it, he even makes the opening exposition scenes a set piece. But he does it by having actors talk slowly and strangely, and Harrison Ford turns up as a cameo at the start, and as explaining it all, there's this weird they're going on at the same time, and everything's very slow, but it really works. It really drags you into it. You've got a great only scene where you've seen how crazy Sheen is, the character Willard, and you've got all this voiceover, and you've this crazy memories of Vietnam he's already went through, which is really just stock footage of stuff they didn't use for other sequences in the film. But it's done so well you don't realise till later. And even when you do realise it does feel like it's an endless madness, so it still feels justified. And then the film becomes a series of set pieces, which is like the Duval, nothing to smell napalm in the morning, as his planes just destroy a village so that the Willard and his boat can get through. But they're really just doing it because there's a good surf space there. There's Playboy bunnies where they see these American troops who've been fighting for months in the war, and are now getting some R&R, which is these Playboy bunnies come to this stage show in the middle of the jungle and do a show, which is like the most expansive version of the shows you'd get in Vietnam for the soldiers, but bring it on, making it crazy and having it within the war itself, which isn't realistic, but it works within this craziness of the war. And it shows you how the soldiers are sent to hell, then pampered with crazy entertainment, and then sent back to war. But it's cruelty. Because how else can you expect them to react when they see women after there's no women around for a while? They go crazy. And it just showed the war. The people aren't fighting a serious war, but the war has serious consequences. You've got the Dealong Bridge, which is in the background behind me, which is an amazing sequence as this bridge, it keeps on getting blown up and then rebuilt so the James can see the bridge is open, but everyone's high everyone's crazy, they're all gone insane, and no one knows what they're fighting for. And that's the playtime when you go from sort of civilization that's degrading then into just pure insanity. Because once they go beyond the bridge, they're in madness. They're in the kind of they're going down the river into Cambodia into just craziness where there's all these. You have the French plantation sequence in the longer cuts where these French who were fighting there in Vietnam before everyone, they're still fighting. I think they're on the edge of Cambodia with this one, and they're not going to give up their lands, even though they're getting killed one by one, and try to keep their own civilization going. It's just another form of craziness. Then you finally reach Kurtz and his compound where there's severed heads and everything, and he's taught all these savages to fight and kill and become the greatest soldiers he can find, because he says that they're the ones who are actually going to win the war because they actually want to get through it. They will do anything to get through the war. And that's the essence of war, to commit to it totally. And that's the Brando's character's method. And of course the method is actually driving him mad because it's not a humane method. And he still has a lot of the humane, civilized taints from before, from his upbringing, from his family, that haunt him and turn him mad. And as Willard goes through this, he starts to feel the madness too. But he knows that he has to complete the mission to end this insanity, because they're sending people up there all the time to try and kill him, and people either die by committing suicide, or they join Brando. But Willard's the one who's going to take him out. Or at least the great finale sequence where Willard goes full commando and takes Brando out while the villagers are having this celebration, killing this animal. Which they were doing anyway, so Coppola sent a camera crew to shoot the ceremony. Like, it wasn't like he ordered them to kill it, it was like he knew they were going to do it, so he just shot it. But of course that gets him in trouble with the animal associations. It's like, well, they're doing it. That's a culture. It's a terrific film, it's just full of these sequences, and this great voiceover. It's just like, everything works beautifully. The whole idea of it is wonderful. And the idea of this myth that's been through mankind, through civilization, and through the Western civilization of the terrifying of their own roots within savagery, within the wars of Europe for religion, and what's come from Africa, and the stuff they've done from colonization in Africa, which are horrific. So they're not comfortable with their own savagery, but man is savage, and they try and deny it. They try and deny the fact they're in a war that's savage. They try and sugarcoat it to say it's a just war and civilized war, and it's just insane. And this idea of a society just gone mad. They don't have a just war, they don't have a justification or anything, so they slowly go mad. And that's what the film feels like. But it's an opera version of it. I mean, if you want a more realistic version, go to Platoon. If you want another outlandish version, go to Full Metal Jacket, which I've already covered, which also has this sense of, it's a war, but it's a war that's been going through time. Like, they say it's Vietnam, but it could be any war that's unjustified. It's just a sense of craziness of a war that has no moral base. And war doesn't really have a moral base anyway, but sometimes it's a fight people who are fascists who need to be taken down. And this one is, but well, that when there's no moral base, there's no base to defeating an enemy that's horrific. The kind of immorality of murder and war just becomes very apparent. So, of course, Coppola's doing a very ambitious film, and if you watch Hard Darkness, if you hear any stories about it, drove him insane. He was never quite the same director after Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now took a lot of him. I think he went into some sort of insanity there. He was stuck in the jungle for a year making this film. It took forever to make. It was his own money. He was slowly going crazy with all the pressure. Martin Sheen had a heart attack halfway through the film. Brando was difficult to work with. The script was spiraling out of control by Coppola's own design to show the madness of war. But I'm not sure he trusted his own narrative. And I think it led to a lot of editing as well, as he tried to put together this narrative that he let spiral out, and then bring it back to what the actual narrative was, and bring Mick O'Hare in to do the voiceover. So it's almost a method directed the film. It just went crazy, went over budget and everything, and it was just nuts. So after Coppola had problems, they made One from the Heart was a film that was ambitious, but you get a sense that Coppola was still tired from Apocalypse Now, and he was never quite right with it. And other films were made that never quite felt as ambitious. Or there was the Cotton Club that Coppola made for Robert Evans that was recut by Evans, and it was never quite the film that Coppola wanted. And he cast issues he didn't really like, and a lot of stuff he wanted to do there that wasn't done. He had some successes like Rumblefish that came out and were wonderful, but he was never quite the same director again. He just kind of had lost his edge. He was now in an industry that had moved on to do like blockbuster films that weren't his type of thing, and ambitious films like Apocalypse Now that also had a popular feel to them were out of fashion. The same, I mean, even something like Godfather was out of fashion. Even when they made the third one, the world had already moved on from The Godfather. I mean, the film had its problems as well, but the world had moved on. So Coppola was a man out of time, and I think the 70s is his legacy. I mean, the films made in the 70s are his legacy. He was caught out by a change in the culture, but also I think he's a director who's more a sensationalist than a strong writer. Like, he ran into this film and made an experiential film, and he was trying to do that, but he never really relied on the writing here, and I think that was a curse that happened later on, which is bizarre because he used to be a very good writer, but he seemed to lose the writing thing within his film, seemed to lose focus after Apocalypse Now. It's almost like he was trying to do something, he succeeded once, he changed his style, and he never really went back to what his strong points were. Same happened with George Lucas. He just had such strong points, and then at a certain point he was so popular, I think he lost track with some of his strong points, and he thought he knew he was doing too well. And I think a lot of directors have the same thing. Just Coppola just never matches output after Apocalypse Now. It's just one of those things that happen. Some directors have a short burst of greatness, and some directors can last decades. A bit like Bresson would, or Renoir could, but it didn't happen for Coppola. He kind of fell into his own hype, but also tried things that damaged him, and I think he actually never found a way to go smaller after Apocalypse Now, and he should have gone smaller. I think he was always trying to try things, but his writing was a big problem. He wasn't writing stuff that was actually that deep anymore. He didn't have a interesting solutions to the scripts he was writing, and if you don't have that, I think it means you're always adding on visual stuff to try and make up for a film that lacks a structure, and that's probably Coppola's curse as he went on. But it's still a hell of a lot of good films there, a lot of interesting films. There's some still really good, enjoyable films like Rumblefish, Tucker the Man in His Dreams are both good. The visuals of Dracula are good. The script, bloody awful. But the visuals are great. The Rainmaker is actually quite a nice little film about lawyers that actually was, because the John Grisham novel was based on, it got underrated. But actually it was a very nice little throwback film. But he hasn't been doing much since then. It was just one of those careers that was just ultimately disappointing. But the good stuff remains. So I hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to do I'm going to look at the other cut of Godfather 3, The Death of Michael Corleone, pretty soon. I've got it, I just haven't watched it yet. So that's one video that's coming up. I hope this background was interesting to you. Hopefully it'll be a bit more smoother the more I do it. I'm just trying it out and seeing what I can do with using the webcam for green screen, so hopefully it worked. I'll be back soon with some more videos, and I hope you enjoyed the Cats one, and I hope you enjoyed the one I did with Graham about 4K. Thanks a lot to both of them for doing that. I really enjoyed both of them. So I'm slowly coming back to making more videos again after a lazy January. That's just the way it goes. And hopefully I'll soon be doing another video or two with Solitary Rodin for our channel. So, thanks for watching. I'll be back soon. Bye.